Hello and welcome to Inspired to Taste. I'm Liz Joy, and today I'll be making a triple flavor Powerpuff pie. A while back, I posted a poll asking which character should inspire my next pie design, and you guys chose this fearless trio, giving me the challenge of creating a dessert that spoke to 3 personalities instead of just one. I'll be making a cookie crust and toppings using vegan almond cookie dough. Start by adding 270 grams of almond flour to a food processor. Then 130 grams of coconut sugar, and 60 grams of arrowroot powder. Pulse or process until evenly distributed. Then add 65 grams of unsweetened applesauce, followed by 30 grams of vanilla bean paste. Process until the mixture sticks together in a firm ball. It should be slightly sticky but not gooey. I'll be rolling all my crust elements to 1/8 inch thickness, beginning with the bottom crust. I'm using a 9-inch tart pan with a removable bottom, which is great because I can use the bottom as a template. I greased my tart pan with butter, and now I'm just trying to carefully place my chilled dough into it. You can patch any holes carefully, then firmly press the dough into all the edges. Trim off the excess. I want to take the time to press the dough into these fluted edges to make a really pretty border. Then you can use a fork to dock the crust to avoid bubbling. Bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 18 to 23 minutes until the crust is firm and slightly brown. I always laminate my printed templates. This makes them sturdier and wipeable, which means I can further cut down the templates and continue using them as needed. But more about that later. If you have any decent-sized scraps left over, keep them. These are great to use as disposable palettes when painting with food coloring. I always chill my dough before hand cutting it. But this recipe can still be annoyingly sticky, so I'm giving it a generous dusting of almond flour first to make my life easier. Then I'm using a pin blade craft knife to cut out blossom, cleaning the knife between cuts. You can use clay or fondant tools to neaten up any raggedy edges. After finishing all the cookie base shapes, I'm going to cut down these templates to create layered faces for the girls. For Blossom, I'm going to just cut around her face and cut out her eyes, taking off her ears, ponytail, and bow. For Buttercup, I'll be keeping the hair on the right, but removing the hair on the left and her eyes. Bubbles is losing her body, ponytails, and eyes. And then I'm just cutting out these cute little eyeless faces, working with very chilled dough to try to keep these shapes from stretching. And making sure to fix any ragged edges. Bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 6 to 12 minutes depending on size. I forgot to set a timer and mine are a little bit crispy, but color equals flavor. And here's how the faces will fit. I love how this extra step adds a subtle 3D effect and more personality. It's time to decorate. I'm gonna start with Buttercup because she's my favorite. I just love her spiciness, and her lack of patience and quick temper make her a really relatable superhero. I'm painting her skin tone directly onto the cookie surface using poppy paints, which are nice and opaque and dry really fast, which means they won't soak into the cookie. Then I'm painting this back piece of hair. I made my girls a little leggier than the originals, so I'm giving them striped tights to match their dresses, using a food coloring marker to draw the stripes. I'll be making all the girls' dresses out of marshmallow fondant because I love that it looks like fabric. I'm cutting the skirt larger than my template so I can create a bit of volume with it. You can use just a tiny bit of water to attach fondant to cookies. I'm using my favorite clay tool to create a slight gathered effect, then painting a small amount of water onto the areas I want her skirt to stick to, and forming a few tiny ruffles in these other spots. I'm using royal icing to pipe cuffs, her belt, and her little Mary Jane shoes. And then attaching her face with more royal icing. I'm filling her eyes with royal icing in 2 steps to avoid cratering, first with a base layer and letting that dry a bit, then piping a second layer domed just slightly higher than the cookie surface. I allowed her eyes to dry completely, and now I'm painting them with the same food coloring I used for her tights. And adding her grumpy little mouth, piping around her eyes, adding eyebrows, and outlining and filling her hair. I let her hair dry completely, and now I'm just painting some glossy details with food coloring for visual interest and to break up all that solid color. Next up is Miss Blossom, our intrepid group leader. I'm repeating all the same steps as before, just switching to her unmistakable shade of bright pink. I'm painting this bottom portion of her ponytail directly onto the cookie, then outlining and flooding the rest with royal icing. I'm using a couple shades of yellow as well as white food coloring to paint highlights onto her hair. Then I'm outlining everything with a brown food coloring marker to add to the illustrated effect of the design. Blossom's big red bow is so iconic. I decided to make a 3D version out of marshmallow fondant. Start by folding each end of the looped portion into a W, or an M, depending on which way you're looking at it. This gives the loop a gathered look. I'm propping up the loops while they dry to make sure they don't collapse. Then, carefully removing the props and attaching each with a little bit of royal icing. And adding a center knot. Last but certainly not least is sweet little Bubbles. Again, I'm just following the same steps as with her sisters. Who's your favorite Powerpuff character and why? Let me know in the comments. For a finishing touch, I decided to add double ball hair ties to her ponytails, using chocolate sprinkles for the effect. I also made an edible version of Townsville. I painted the back buildings directly onto the cookie surface. Then, to add a sense of depth, I'm piping the 2 front buildings with royal icing. And just drawing and painting simple details with food coloring. Now, onto the super secret ingredients for my fillings. I'll start with Buttercup, who's getting a matcha and lime ganache for a nonconformist mix of bold and zesty. I'm starting with 190 grams of white chocolate and adding 135 milliliters of hot cream. Heat the cream until it just begins to simmer. You don't want it to boil. Allow it to sit for a couple of minutes, then gently stir until fully combined. Add 12 grams of fresh lime juice, then 5 grams of lime zest, followed by 5 grams of matcha powder, then 22 grams of softened unsalted butter. I use an immersion blender to create a silky smooth texture. Then cover with plastic wrap, touching the surface until the ganache cools to a pipeable consistency. Bubbles filling will be a mix of coconut, butterfly pea flour, and mascarpone, adding a whimsical combo of delicate, sunny, and sweet flavors. Start with 190 grams of finely chopped white chocolate, then add 135 milliliters of hot coconut milk. Allow it to sit a couple of minutes, then gently stir until smooth. Add 6 grams of butterfly pea powder. I also added a few drops of fat-soluble light blue food coloring, followed by 22 grams of softened unsalted butter. Blend with an immersion blender until smooth. Then add 35 grams of softened mascarpone cheese. Cover with plastic wrap touching the surface and allow to cool to pipeable consistency. Blossoms filling is going to be a charming mix of strawberries and rose, adding slightly tart berry sweetness with floral undertones. I'm starting this one with 190 grams of Valrhona Strawberry Inspiration chocolate, adding 135 milliliters of hot cream, allowing it to sit for a couple of minutes, then gently stirring until combined. Then I'm adding 8 grams of rose water, followed by 8 grams of freeze-dried strawberry powder, and 22 grams of softened unsalted butter. I adjusted this color with a few drops of fat-soluble food coloring. Time to construct this pie. I'm starting by marking where each filling will go, using a food coloring marker. Blossoms filling will be in the center. After piping this section, I'm going to refrigerate it until it's firm. Here's a pro tip for smoothing your ganache. Once it's been refrigerated, use a heat gun to heat a metal palette knife. Then use the palette knife to smooth out any bumps and ridges on the ganache. Buttercup's matcha and lime filling will be on the left. And then Bubbles' butterfly pea and coconut filling on the right. Once everything's been chilled and smoothed, I can attach the decorations using tempered chocolate as glue. You can also use candy melts for this part. I made some little sparkle cookies as a finishing touch. Let's take one final look at this flavor explosion and then dig in. Click or tap for more whimsical dessert designs.